Okay, good morning, everyone. I'd just like to ask Mrs. Stewart to say a few words of housekeeping. Thank you. Special hybrid meeting of Angus Council. I would remind all attendees that this meeting is being recorded and has also been broadcast live on the Angus Council YouTube channel. Can I remind all elected members joining us remotely to turn their microphones to mute unless they wish to speak and indicate that they wish to do so by raising their hands remotely. Can I also remind members that under Standing Order 19.4, remote members attending hybrid meetings where quasi-judicial and regulatory matters are being considered will not be permitted to participate by audio only and must have their video and camera functions switched on at all times. For any members of the public watching, please note that all the public committee reports, including details of specific recommendations, are available on the Council's website. Mrs. Stewart, are there any apologies for absence, please?
Thank you, Provost. We have apologies from Councillor Boyd, Councillor Cowdy, Councillor Gall, Councillor Shepherd, Councillor Stewart, Councillor Wan and Councillor Whiteside.
Okay, thank you very much. Agenda item number 2 are declarations of interest and statements of transparency. I think I'll speak for us all. I think we've all had emails about this application, so I would just say a blanket statement of transparency unless anybody's got anything else. Is that agreed? Okay, thank you very much. In terms of Section 38A of the Town and Country Planning Scotland Act 1997, and in accordance with the Council's scheme of governance, terms of reference, the Council is required to hold a pre-determination hearing. Following the hearing, the Council is required to determine the application. In this connection, there is submitted a procedure note for the pre-determination hearing. Is this noted? Thank you. Part 1 of this meeting is to undertake a pre-determination hearing for planning application reference 24/00699 full for the construction and operation of a 22-bay 400/275 kV air insulated substation located on a level platform and the formation of associated earthworks, access, drainage, landscaping and security, including the creation of temporary construction compounds on land southwest of Balkembach Farm, Teeling. Thereafter, part 2 of the meeting will move to determination of the application. As previously advised, a pre-determination hearing is required under Section 38A of the Town and Country Planning Scotland Act 1997, as amended, as the application is categorised a national development. A number of members of the community are speaking today, as well as the applicant. We recognise that the subject is an emotive one and would just like to remind everyone to remain courteous. The first part of today's meeting comprises a pre-determination hearing, which will allow councillors to hear from and question those with a stated interest in the application. Although the meeting is open to members of the public, only the applicant officers, relevant consultees and those who have submitted a request to speak by the required deadline will be permitted to speak and answer questions from councillors. Under Standing Order 12, speakers, you're allowed up to 5 minutes unless you're representing other individuals and have previously notified that you have up to 10 minutes. I would ask that you focus your comments on matters raised in your representation and ensure they are specific to this planning application and not to other matters. Due to the number of interested parties addressing today's meeting, the applicant has been granted 10 minutes to speak. Only councillors are permitted to ask questions of the speakers, and they may recall a previous speaker for clarification if necessary. A reminder to councillors that this first part of the meeting is an information gathering session only, and any debate or discussion on the application will not be entered into at this stage. This will take place later in the meeting. I would urge you to keep your questions clear and concise and avoid prefacing questions with comments and avoid any questions where the answer has already been provided. I will now pass on to the Planning Service and to Mr. Taylor as the case officer to provide us with a summary of the application. Thank you.
Thank you, Provost, and good morning, members. Can we see the slides, please? I just asked the technical people, is that going to go full screen on the Teams meeting? Thank you. Thank you. So the planning application before us today is a national level planning application. So that sits at the top of the hierarchy of development. National applications relate to national developments, which are described as significant developments of national importance that will help to deliver the planned spatial strategy set out in National Planning Framework 4. But the application for us relates to the formation, the construction and operation of a 22-bay 400 kilovolt air-insulated substation on a level platform and formation of associated earthworks, access, drainage, landscape and security, and the creation of temporary construction compounds on land southwest of Vulkenbach Farm at Teeling. So before I get into the detail of the proposal before us, just a reminder of the basis on which we must make the decision today. Sections 25 and 37.2 of the Principal Act, the Town and Country Planning Act, require that we must make a planning decision in accordance with the development plan unless there are material planning considerations which indicate otherwise. In this case, the development plan comprises National Planning Framework 4, which was introduced in 2023, and the Angus Local Development Plan, which was adopted in 2016. And it's important to note as well that planning legislation indicates where there is any conflict between the policies contained within the development plan, the most recent policy document prevails. So in this case, the most recent policy document is clearly MPF 4. Report Appendix 4 lists relevant development plan policies relating to this development, and Section 8 of the report before members provides officers' assessment of the proposal against those policies and against relevant material planning considerations. I've indicated what national development status means, a significant development of national importance. It's also relevant to note that this is an application which has attracted a significant volume and level of public interest. We have 1,780 public objections to the proposal, raising significant concerns relating to the proposal. We also have detailed objections from Teeling Community Council, which is the statutory consultee community council for this particular development. So a bit of detail of the proposal itself. We start with a slide which shows the general location of the site. So firstly, I'll draw members' attention to the Ordnance Survey extract located on the right-hand side. The approximate position of the site is identified by the blue arrow. So it sits, roughly speaking, around about 3 kilometres to the north of the Dundee-Angus administrative boundary, approximately 3 kilometres west of the A90 trunk road, and to the west of Kirkton of Teeling, around about 1 kilometre to the west of Kirkton of Teeling. If we move to the left, we can see the red line identifies the application site. The application site itself is quite a lot larger than the actual development, but currently comprises agricultural land, a number of different fields. The site slopes gently down from north to south towards the Fithy Burn, which is located adjacent to the southern site boundary. The site currently contains an electricity transmission line which runs between Teeling and Westfield towards the south, and 2 large wind turbines. As part of the development, the 2 large wind turbines which sit towards the west of the site would be removed. So a bit more detail of the proposed site layout. So what we're talking about is the formation of a 19.2 hectare platform on which the electrical apparatus would be located. That measures roughly 675 by 285 metres. The wider development incorporates a larger area equating to approximately 55 hectares. That area also incorporates landscaping bunds, access roads and areas for the temporary construction compound and site drainage. Access to the site will be taken from the U322 Preston to Parry Public Road. A new access will be formed to the east of the site in the approximate position of the blue arrow which is shown on the slide. There will be a temporary construction compound and laydown area which would sit between the substation platform and the road access, and that will be returned to agricultural use following completion of the development. But the proposal would involve significant cut and fill works to form the substation platform and to form earth bunds which would surround the site to the north, south, to the east and to the west. Before I go further into the presentation, I think it's important to note early doors that this application is under the Town and Country Planning Act for the physical development of the substation itself. No overhead lines are proposed as part of this application. Overhead lines, as members are likely aware, are subject to a separate consenting process administered through the Scottish Ministers and the Energy Consents Unit. Information submitted in support of the application indicates that the substation before us is required not only for the Teacup, the Teeling to Contour overhead line, which was recently considered by Angus Council, and Angus Council submitted an objection to. You can see the position of that overhead line illustrated by the black line and the black star, which sits to the north side of the substation. It's important to note that this substation, the applicant has indicated, is also required for consented upgrades to existing overhead lines. And we can see to the top left-hand side of the slide, we have an orange coloured line. That is the redirected route, or that would be the redirected route, which runs between Teeling and Ayliffe. That line has secured consent to be upgraded from 275 kilovolts to 400 kilovolts, and the substation is also required for the upgraded overhead line which runs between Teeling, Westfield and Fife, and that's illustrated by the green star on the left-hand side coming out the south side of the substation. So the applicants made it clear that the substation before us today is needed regardless of any decision on the Teeling to Kintyre overhead line, which is obviously going to go through the inquiry process to consider its acceptability, noting that Angus Council has submitted an objection to that particular proposal. So a bit of detail about what the development would look like, what's in front of us in terms of the plans. We have a couple of cross sections taken east-west across the site shown at the top of the slide. So the electrical apparatus within the site would sit on a platform which is cut into the slope. The platform would be at 139 metres above ordnance datum. The equipment located within the substation would amount to a height of approximately 15 metres. Earth bunds would be formed surrounding the site, as is illustrated, I think, on the left-hand side of the top slide. And just for illustrative purposes, the photograph taken and shown in the bottom left-hand corner is the recently completed substation at Rothy Norman. That is smaller than the substation we're looking at today, but it gives you a general impression of the type of apparatus that will be contained within the substation which is proposed. So I mentioned in earlier slides that the formation of the substation platform would require some earthworks, and the slides, the sections which are shown, the top three, illustrate that. Areas which would be cut into the slope are shown by the red shaded area, and the areas of fill required to form the substation platform are shown by the areas shaded green. Slightly more helpful, probably illustrative section of that is shown at the very bottom, which shows the relationship of the substation platform to existing levels and how it might appear in the landscape once the earth bunds are formed and are planted up as part of the landscaping scheme. So the substation platform would sit into the hill slope surrounded by earth bunds, which would be landscaped to try and help to mitigate some of the landscape and visual impacts that would be as a consequence of the development. So the site would contain one control building, which has the general appearance of a sort of modern agricultural building that would measure approximately 1,200 square meters in area, approximately 7 meters in height. That building would sort of contain electrical control equipment, staff welfare facilities, and storage space. The application is accompanied by a detailed landscaping scheme. So I've mentioned that the platform would be surrounded by earth bunds formed by cut and fill works. Those earth bunds will be subject to landscaping through woodland blocks, which would be formed by a mix of mixed evergreen and deciduous trees, deciduous tree blocks, scrub and shrub planting, wildflower planting, and with suds features surrounded by wetland planting, which would sit to the south of the site. In terms of flooding and drainage impacts, the application is designed to have a sustainable urban drainage system, which is designed to take account of allowance for climate change. The application site itself is located out with the functional floodplain. The application has been subject to consultation with both SEPA and the Council's Roads Drainage team. Neither party has offered any objection, noting that the site sits outside of the functional floodplain and the SUDS drainage design has been designed to take account of climate change. So I'll just try and, as I go through the slides, just touch on a few of the more significant impacts associated with the development. Now, obviously, this is a development which will generate a fairly significant level of construction traffic over the 4-year construction process. It's indicated that the peak traffic movements will be required associated with importation of material to form the substation hard standing platform, and that peak traffic would likely take place over a 2-year period. Traffic coming into the site has been deliberately designed so that it avoids the most populated areas of Teeling and Belgrey. No construction traffic would access the site via Teeling or Belgrey. The inbound route for construction traffic would be via Maltmill Road at Inveraldy Farm. That route would run to the south of Inveraldy Farm, Maltmill Farm, and then to the south of the existing electrical substations before joining the U322 public road to the northwest of Myton of Claver House. It would then travel north along that route for approximately 1 kilometre to meet the site access, which is hopefully clear. It's shown by the orange coloured star. Traffic leaving the site would follow the same 1 kilometre section to the south of the U322 public road, but it would continue south rather than turning onto Maltmill Road, and it would rejoin the A90 trunk road at Emmet Roundabout to the southeast of the site. The construction traffic leaving the site would follow the route shown in red. Inbound traffic would follow the route shown in green. A number of passing places will be formed along the U322 public road, and I've tried to indicatively show the locations of those passing places with the blue circles that you can perhaps see on the slide. Peak construction traffic would equate to 212 two-way movements, so that would be 106 inbound movements, 106 outbound movements to the site during the 12-hour working day that would be proposed as part of the development. The information submitted by the applicant has been considered by colleagues in the Road Service, by Transport Scotland and colleagues at Dundee City Council, who are satisfied with the methodology used in terms of assessing the impact of traffic movements. They're satisfied with the conclusions and the proposed mitigation measures. None of the expert consultees which have looked at that particular issue have raised any objection, but they have recommended a number of planning conditions relating to a construction traffic management plan requiring public road improvement works and requiring the applicant to sign a roads maintenance agreement. The application also has the potential to give rise to impacts on amenity for the nearest residential receptors. And again, these are impacts which are assessed in the applicant's environmental impact assessment report. Most significant impacts are likely to relate to noise and activity during the construction process associated with the formation of the earthworks and associated with HGV movements to and from the site. But the applicant's environmental impact assessment report again assesses these impacts associated with noise, vibration and other amenity issues. It considers, subject to appropriate mitigation, those impacts would not be unacceptable, both operationally and during the construction process. Mitigation is proposed through management plans for dust, for construction noise, air quality, and to regulate traffic speeds. Again, that information has been examined by our colleagues in the Environmental Health Service. They have considered the methodology used by the applicant. They have considered the findings of that assessment. They are satisfied with those findings. Again, subject to appropriate mitigation. They have no objection to the proposal subject to conditions which will control construction noise, vibration, air quality, dust and artificial light. And again, it's noted construction traffic deliberately designed to avoid going through the most populated areas at Teeling. But this is inevitably something which will have amenity impacts on those who live in the surrounding area during the construction process in particular. One of the other key issues that required to be assessed in the applicant's submission is landscape and visual impacts. And the slide before members is intended to show predicted visibility of the development. It's known as a zone of theoretical visibility. And the application site is shown in the centre of the slide, identified by the red line. And then we have 3 dashed lines extending out from the site at 1, 2 and 3 kilometres. And the areas that shaded in pink and purple are intended to illustrate where the development will be visible from in the landscape. So visibility of the development is most obvious within 1 kilometre of the site, as might be expected. Beyond 1 kilometre up to 3 kilometres, visibility is largely contained to the higher land on the Sidlaws to the north, looking south on some of those summits and the south-facing hill slopes, and on elevated land to the south, including sections of Emmet Road, the U322, where it is higher than the site, looking across the sort of valley towards the development. I'll now move on to a few photo montages of the development, and that will show the site in terms of the baseline position, so before development takes place, following completion of the development, and after what a prediction of effect would be after 10 years once the landscaping proposed has started to mature. And what I've tried to do is give you an illustration of impacts from more elevated ground, starting with a viewpoint from Balkillo Hill. You may be able to make out just to the top left, VP1 is shown. That's taken from Balkillo Hill, elevated land, approximately 2.5 kilometres from the site, looking towards development. And then I've tried to show impacts from areas closer to the site from the north, east, south, and to the west. So this is the baseline position from that elevated view. You can see the approximate position of the application site identified by the red dashed line. You can see the 2 large wind turbines which sit to the west of the site that will be removed to accommodate development. And this baseline position, there is open views from this viewpoint to the south towards the Tay Estuary. You can see in the background of the site, you can see the existing Teeling substation to the left, to the right-hand side of the wind turbine, you can maybe see in the background, and you can see agricultural development adjacent to that, and just to the right of that and behind the 2 wind turbines within the application site. And that view would change as shown here on completion of development. In this view, you can see that as a consequence of the substation sitting down within the platform that will be created by cut and fill works, and as a consequence of the earth bunds, impacts from that location, the development would be obvious, but not in the opinion of officers unacceptable. It will be seen in the context of existing substation and agricultural development, and views would be continue to be available from recreational receptors using that particular route above and beyond the development, and the development will be seen backclothed against landform. And as we moved on to the 10-year image, when the landscaping starts to take effect, obviously from higher ground, you can't completely mitigate the impact because you're in such a high elevation, but it's considered that when that development is viewed from that location, backcloth by landform, taking account of the landscape mitigation through planting and earth bunds, that's not considered, in the opinion of officers at least, to be an unacceptable impact. Moving to an area approximately 500 metres to the north of the site. So this is approximately along the public road, which is just to the north of the site, around about 500 metres on the public road between Teeling and Octahouse. So we can see in the top photograph, the baseline position, the application site is shown. Open views across the site currently. You can see the 2 wind turbines, which will be removed on the right-hand side. And as we move to the bottom slide, you can see how the substation would be fairly prominent and visible in that view. Some of the impact will be reduced by the fact that the substation will be set down within the site. But this impact is identified in the applicant's environmental impact assessment report to be a significant impact and an adverse impact. Mitigation starts to reduce the significance of that effect as the planting matures. Now, obviously, because the substation is designed to accommodate overhead lines, there would need to be gaps within the planting, so the mitigation of impacts from that location couldn't be totally secured. As indicated, this is an impact the applicant considers to be significant, but reducing as planting starts to mature. Moving to the east of the site, so this is located just to the west of Valnooth on the public road, the U322 public road, quite close to the eastern site boundary. So again, we can see the baseline position in the top image. We can see the overhead line on the left-hand side, which runs between Teeling and Westfield. We can see, maybe not massively clearly, but there's 2 wind turbines in the background. They roughly sit at the west side of the site that will be removed. As we move to the bottom slide, we can see that the substation has been formed, contained by earth bunds, which limits visibility of the substation apparatus. But again, this is an impact which the applicant's environmental impact assessment reports suggests is a significant impact. You go from a position of having open views across the site to that view being contained by the earth bunds, which would be introduced. Again, that's identified to be an adverse impact and a significant impact. But after 10 years, the significance of the impact starts to reduce as the planting matures and the character of that starts to change. Moving to the south of the site, this is taken from adjacent to Myton of Claverhouse. You can see again, top slide shows the baseline position, the 2 wind turbines, and you can maybe just about make out the red line, which shows the approximate position of the substation platform. Sorry, that's not very clear. But as we move to the bottom slide, we can see the substation platform introduced. And from this view, from this location, you can see as the substation platform is cut into the slope with the landscape mitigation provided by the earth bunds, the significance of that impact is reduced. It benefits from the rising land further to the north, which is a sort of recognised way to reduce the significance of landscape and visual impacts. And as the planting matures, again, quite a significant level of mitigation will be provided in terms of views towards the proposed substation. The last photo montage I intend to show of the substation in isolation is the view from the west of the site. So this is taken from the public road, which runs between Octahouse and Bridgefoot, I think. So it's described as north of Winton on the photo montage. Again, at the moment, the baseline position is fairly open views through the site. Once development is undertaken, that view will be somewhat closed off by the formation of earth bunds. And in this view, prior to mitigation through landscape planting, the substation apparatus will be a fairly obvious feature in that view. Once the landscape planting starts to mature, it mitigates a large degree of that impact. But again, it's not something that can be totally hidden in the landscape. It would remain an obvious feature in views from areas close to the site. So just in summary on landscape impacts, this is a development which would change the character of the site from that of an agricultural fields, agricultural land, to an electrical substation, a more industrialised feature. This is a development which would have significant impacts on the landscape in areas close to the site, but those impacts reduce with distance as a consequence of the bunding which is proposed and the landscaping, which obviously will take some time to mature. And in terms of considering the acceptability of that impact, NPF 4 Policy 11 gives us advice in terms of judging that acceptability, it indicates that where impacts associated with developments are localised and or appropriate design mitigation has been applied, they will generally be considered to be acceptable. And the opinion of officers are there would be some locally significant impacts, but they are contained within a fairly localised area surrounding the site, and officers are satisfied that appropriate design mitigation has been applied. Now I'll just try and touch a little bit more on some other matters that have arisen and reference some of the points made by third parties in objection to the development. Now, understandably, there is a significant degree of public concern in relation to potential cumulative impacts associated with this development, and that's clear from the significant volume of public objection and from the Community Council objection to this proposal. A lot of developer interest from third-party developers in terms of particularly battery storage in this location. And we can see the proposed substation shown in orange with the orange star. We can see the existing Teeling substation shown with green and the recently completed sea green substation shown in blue. And the areas identified by coloured polygons and numbered are areas where there is developer interest in battery storage development. There is consent granted by an energy consents unit for a battery storage development Balnooth. That's the area shown in green, identified with a number 1 that has secured consent from energy consents unit for development. There is an application known as 17 acres shown by the number 2, which sits to the north of the sea green substation. That application is currently under consideration with energy consents unit. There are other developments in the surrounding area which haven't reached that stage. The Fithy, particularly the Fithy battery storage proposal, illustrated by the area labelled as number 4, as potentially a significant area of development that would be come forward if that were to reach application stage. But in terms of where we are now, the certainty that we have before us, it's considered that the substation could coexist with the consented Balnooth battery storage proposal. There is a potential for significant cumulative impacts were the other developments to come forward, particularly the Fithy BESS proposal, but that impact would have to be considered if and when that application comes before us. The only certainty we have at this stage is that Balnooth is consented, and it's considered that the development could coexist with the Balnooth battery storage development as shown by the number 1 on that plan. Moving on to cumulative impacts associated with other SSEN proposals. Now, I've touched upon, I think, in the second or third slide on the relationship of this proposal to other overhead lines. And obviously, Angus Council has objected to the Teeling to Kintore overhead line, which is shown on this slide in black. There would be a number of other electrical lines coming into this substation. As shown orange, which is the Teeling to Ayliffe, as shown green, the Teeling to Westfield, and the tiebacks, which are proposed between the proposed substation and the existing substation at Teeling. There would again be some significant cumulative impacts with various substation towers located, particularly in areas to the north of the site. The acceptability of the Teeling to Kintore line will be considered through the inquiry process, but other cumulative impacts are not considered to be unacceptable, bearing in mind that the other routes shown are really redirected routes that already exist. So I think the other towers we see in this image, there would be 13 new towers introduced, but 12 would be removed because they mainly relate to existing overhead lines which run between Teeling and Ayliffe and Teeling and Westfield. So significant cumulative impacts potentially in the local area to the north of the site. The acceptability of the Teeling to Kintore line will be considered through the inquiry process. So this is a photo montage taken from the elevated land to the north of the site, and I can try and describe what the different things shown in the image are. So the red towers you see, they are the towers shown that would go into the substation. They're part of the Teeling to Kintore overhead line route. Obviously, the council has objected to that. But the other towers shown on this image are really redirected existing routes. So we see in the foreground, we see 3 yellow coloured towers. They already exist. They are part of the Teeling to Ayliffe route. That route would be redirected into the Emmett substation. So you see the towers turn to the right towards the new substation, but that would require, or that would be associated with works to remove towers, which would extend further to the west, going into the existing Teeling substation north of Balnooth. So while it's acknowledged there would be significant cumulative impacts associated with overhead lines, those impacts are inevitable and unavoidable, but it's considered, cumulatively speaking, the national benefit of grid infrastructure upgrades and what that would potentially achieve in terms of the climate crisis is considered to outweigh the local adverse impacts that would be a consequence of the development before us. So this application, as I touched upon, is subject to significant public objection, both from Teeling Community Council, a statutory consultee, and from members of the public. And the matters raised in objections are summarised, and the Teeling Community Council objection is summarised in section 6 of the report. Copies of that document are provided in appendices, and section 7 of the report summarises matters raised in public comments. And the report before members tries to, as far as possible, address the concerns raised by third parties. Inevitably, this is a development which will result in significant landscape and visual impacts, including cumulative impacts, and understandable concerns about future development and industrialisation of this general location. In terms of those projects, we have certainty over Balnooth. We consider this development can coexist with that, but clearly we'll need to carefully assess and look at the future developments if and when they come forward. So finally, trying to sum up, there is strong development plan support for the proposal. It is a national development. National developments are significant developments of national importance that will help to deliver the planned spatial strategy. The extensive environmental information submitted has been considered by expert consultation bodies. Those consultation bodies have indicated that they are satisfied that impacts associated with this development can be appropriately mitigated. It's a proposal which has attracted significant public objection. The proposal would have locally significant impacts, both individually and cumulatively. The opinion of officers is, taking account of the information submitted, having regard to the advice of expert consultees, officers consider the adverse impacts that would be realised from this proposal are outweighed by the wider benefits of delivering the grid infrastructure upgrades. The proposal is considered to comply with development plan policy. In the opinion of officers, there are no material planning considerations which justify refusal of planning permission, and on that basis, the application is recommended for conditional approval.
Thank you very much, Mr. Taylor. Do members have any questions for Mr. Taylor? Councillor Beattie, thank you.
Thanks, Provost. Can I just say that we've got an awful lot of information here in front of us. I'll be limited to the number of questions. If we keep them really brief, can we have a few? Thank you very much. So, Mr. Taylor, can I ask just your last slide? Could you maybe pop that one back up again? Just the conclusion slide would be good if you could. Yeah. So on that slide, you can see there's a number of towers included within the actual boundary of the works that's planned. Okay, now in the documents that we've received, it says that the MOD would not object, provided there are no towers within there. But there's clearly towers in there. Can you reconcile that for us, please?
Thanks for your question, Councillor Beattie. Yes, I can understand sort of the confusion the wording of the MOD response has created. I think their comment on this is, following review of the application documents and noting that no overhead towers are part of this application, they confirm they have no objection. I don't think there's a suggestion from MOD that overhead towers are unacceptable. I think they're just acknowledging that this application does not propose any. And just to sort of demonstrate that, if you look at their consultation response to the overhead line, the teacup overhead line, I think they suggest that they have no objection to the teacup overhead line, subject to I think updated aviation maps being formed. So I totally appreciate the confusion the wording of their consultation response has caused, but I think it is clear that they're just acknowledging that the proposal doesn't incorporate overhead lines, as opposed to suggesting that overhead lines wouldn't be acceptable.
Okay, thank you. My next question is, does this application confer any permitted development rights on other parts of the site? Because as you can see from the diagram there in front of you, there are big chunks of land to the east and to the north, and which you could even argue to the south, where it's within the boundary, but is it possible for SSEN just to suddenly decide to build something on those bits without planning permission?
Yeah, thanks again for your question. So yes, there are permitted development rights for the operational land of the undertaking. I think the opinion of officers, and this has been discussed with SSEN, is the operational land of the undertaking in this case will be the substation platform. It wouldn't be the agricultural land to the north. My understanding is that SSEN, I should let them speak for themselves, but my understanding is they don't intend to acquire that land to the north long term. I think they might use that or need to access that as part of the construction process, but my understanding is they have no intention of acquiring that land as part of this development, and certainly officers' view is the permitted development rights will only apply to the substation platform itself.
That's great, thank you very much. On cumulative impact, you showed us the potential for battery energy storage sites, and you pointed out number 4, which looks really big on the screen. Do you know if this has a grid connection already agreed?
I don't, I'm afraid. I actually spent a fairly long period of time the other night looking through a list of consented grid connections and couldn't see it, but I wouldn't like to give you any certainty on that. If and when that application, or if and when that development comes forward before us, that's something we'll be looking for information on amongst the other assessment of other impacts associated with it. But we really have no certainty at this time if or when that proposal will come forward, or indeed if it has a grid connection.
Okay, and on paragraph 831, the effects of the lowland hill ranges LCT are described as falling below the threshold of significance. That's the quote. What is the threshold of significance, and how is that determined?
Yeah, so I should firstly say I'm not a qualified landscape architect, so I'll answer your question as best I can. So significant impacts, a threshold of significance. Sorry, some notes on this is. So impacts which are significant are impacts which are described as moderate or major. Impacts which are not significant are described as either minor or negligible. So what does that mean, and how is that assessed? Well, that's really down to the judgment of the landscape professional having regard to appropriate landscape guidance. But I could give you an example of how minor effects are described in the information. Hopefully that's helpful. So minor effects, according to this, are indicatively described as the development will result in a small change in landscape characteristics and character over long duration. But I could then go on to describe what moderate or major effects might be. So moderate effects might be the development will result in a noticeable change in landscape characteristics and character, likely affecting a landscape with a moderate susceptibility to that type of change. Or major is described as the proposed development will result in an obvious change in landscape characteristics and character, likely affecting a landscape with a moderate or high susceptibility to that type of change. Ultimately, the assessment before us is assessing impacts on the lowland hill ranges landscape character type as not being particularly significant. And when you consider that as a landscape character type that I think extends from east of Perth to way past the site on that sort of highland going east of Teeling, it will be a development that's visible from parts of that landscape character type, but only a relatively small area. So we're not concerned that that's a particular significant impact on that particular landscape character type.
Okay, thank you. And last question, and it might not even be for you, so you might be getting off early. Transport. You showed a slide with the identified routes. Now, we know from, not so much from other developments, but just through common practice that these routes are not always followed. I'm thinking of places up near Northwater Bridge, just between Beacon and Edsel, and also Glen Prosen. Yeah, how do we actually ensure that those routes are followed?
So I think if you look through the planning conditions, one of the proposals is that there will be a requirement for a planning condition monitoring officer. So we would expect to get a regular report from the planning condition monitoring officer that tells us if there's any issues with compliance. But yeah, I mean, obviously there's an element of good faith involved. Were it to come to our attention through reports from the public that it wasn't being followed, obviously we would then look to take that issue up with the applicant. But I think at this stage we have no reason to believe that wouldn't be the case.
Thanks very much, Mr. Taylor.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Cheap, thank you.
Thanks, Provost. Taylor, it's a bit early in the day probably for this, for a hypothetical question, but bearing in mind, given consent has been granted for the Aylwith to Emwick and Westfield to Emwick upgrades, if this application was not approved today, that would obviously be possibly an appeal to the reporter in that case then, and how would they take that into mind, bearing in consent has been given to 2 lines already?
Sorry, can you just go over that again, Councillor? I'm not sure I fully understand the question.
Hypothetically, if this application is not approved today, then I'm presuming there's an appeal process that could be followed by the applicant, and if that went to a reporter, given that there's consent for 2 upgrades of lines to go into this substation, how would that be viewed in the context of an appeal?
So this application would have to be considered on its own merits, but in terms of consideration of need, I suppose the reporter would look at the requirements for the substation, and I would imagine the reporter would have regard to the fact that there are existing lines that are consented to upgrade. Yes, I think the reporter would have regard to that. The SSEN might have further input on answering that particular point.
Councillor Devine, thank you.
Thanks, Provost. I've got a couple of questions as well. I hope that's okay. On page 44, there are times given and noise limits. Does this actually mean that there's going to be work going on from 7 until 7, 12 hours a day, every day in the week? And is this not very unusual? Presumably that means that all the transport is going to be going on 12 hours a day. And that just seems pretty intolerable. Sorry, I'm not supposed to say anything. As a question, is this not unusual?
I don't know if my colleague in environmental health wants to say something on that, but I think factually speaking, you're correct. The proposed construction timescale is 7 till 7, 7 days a week. Noise limits are proposed to control the level of amenity impact, and environmental health services considered the mitigation measures that would be employed to try and minimise impacts on amenity to satisfy those impacts can be appropriately mitigated.
So a follow-up one would be, has there been a health impact assessment done by SSEN?
Sorry to interject. Could members of the public remain quiet, please? Thank you.
So there's not been a health impact in terms of something badged as a health impact assessment, but the various amenity impacts that can impact on health have been assessed. So things like air quality, noise, vibration and dust and odour, and a number of management plans are proposed to deal with those impacts.
Right, I've got another question completely separate. It's to do with biodiversity and landscaping, and there's obviously a lot of concern about landscaping and the fact that in some places it hasn't been done particularly well. I do notice there's a condition regarding the management and maintenance, but I'm concerned that it suggests that if trees or hedges die within 10 years, they should be replaced. Surely we'd know within 3 to 5 years whether trees are going to die or flourish. Is it not possible to change that to a shorter timescale?
My understanding is the way the condition's worded is actually, it's giving you a bigger safeguard than what you're actually looking for. So instead of the requirement only lasting for replanting for 3 years, we're saying that if anything dies within the first 10 years, it's covered. So that's actually a better safeguard than something 3 years. We have 10 years of a safeguard. If anything dies within that 10-year period after being planted, it would require to be replanted. If we change that to 3 years, that would only make that requirement in place for the first 3 years.
Right. I don't fully understand that, but I'll have to accept it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Doran, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Devine had asked one of the questions that I was going to ask, so that's great. But actually, I've got a couple more that lead on from that. So one of my first questions is that the LVIA doesn't provide a detailed assessment of the impact of development on the Sidlaw LLA. So just wonder that expected. What can you give more information about why it doesn't have that?
Yeah, I mean, the report touches upon the impact on the Sidlaw LLA, and the applicant's assessment does make reference to it. There was obviously an overlap in timing in terms of when the Sidlaw LLA was introduced and the submission of the application and the spotting documents were produced. We not only have we relied on the information provided by SSEN in terms of landscape impact, our own landscape advisor has looked at this. He is satisfied that impacts on the Sidlaw LLA wouldn't be particularly significant, noting that this development would only be visible from a small area to the very east of the LLA. Obviously, the LLA extends fairly significantly to the west, where there'd be no visibility of it. When you look at the characteristics of the LLA and why it was designated, it talks about open views across towards the Tay, and hopefully the visualization showed that the development would sit down within the site and it wouldn't really disrupt views across the top of the substation towards the sort of Tay estuary. So we're satisfied there has been an adequate assessment of the impact on the LLA, both in terms of the information provided by the applicant, but in terms of the assessment also carried out by our own landscape advisor.
Okay, thank you. And my next question relates to some of the mitigations and the timeline of all of this, because some of the report notes the significant local impacts, which would be kind of short term relating to the traffic, but then also there's the longer term ones relating to the planting, which is noted in most of the documents to be kind of 10 years post construction. Do you have a good understanding of the whole timeline coming together? So how long those short-term impacts would be experienced for, and then the longer-term impacts until full completion?
Thanks for your question, Councillor Doran. So there's a number of planning conditions proposed which require a lot of management plans to be submitted and agreed. So some of that detail will come later. In terms of planting, we'll be looking for that to happen as early as possible in the construction process. So I think one of the early things that would take place is the earthworks to form the substation platform. I think the applicant's submission suggests that they would look to start installing planting as early as possible in the process, so that obviously mitigation then starts to be effective as early as possible in the process. But yeah, a number of management plans will be required to mitigate various impacts associated with noise, air quality, dust, and these types of things. But that information would come forward as part of the planning condition process.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Duff.
Yeah, thank you, Provost, and thanks to Mr. Taylor for his detailed description so far. I've got a simple question. It's about roads and about nomenclature. The so-called Emmet roundabout, am I correct in saying that is underneath the A90? It's not on the A90.
So the roundabout, which is described as the Emmet roundabout, is if you were leaving Dundee to go up the A90, it's that last roundabout there. So the road the construction traffic would connect to joins on that roundabout, and then it goes over the top of the A90 across a road bridge before travelling west and then turns north towards the site.
So is that the roundabout at the Strowens garage?
It is.
Right, okay, that's perfect, thank you.
Councillor Proctor.
Thank you, Provost. And thank you very much, Mr. Havey, for the brief. My sort of questions sort of branch along the same as lines as my colleague Councillor Dorn and Councillor Devine, but it's mainly about agriculture and tourism. And a lot of farmers in the South Laws areas find that making a livelihood is very difficult, and they've branched into sort of agritourism. Lots of people have set up businesses, and in on page 45, paragraph 5335, just a quote. It says, visibility of the proposed development would affect the scenic views available from the foothills of the Angus Glens, and it's a special quality as a popular hill walking landscape with a number of hilltop destinations. This clearly, what's proposed is it says in the pages, would be detrimental to that. Has consideration been taken into account for sort of both the agricultural economy and the sort of tourism economy?
Thanks for your question, Councillor Proctor. In terms of agricultural land, there is a policy test which applies to whether development agricultural land would be acceptable. You'll note from the report that the land is not prime quality land. I understand that the landowner has agreed to sell the site to the applicant, so presumably they're satisfied that there wouldn't be an unacceptable impact on the viability of their land holding. Tourism. Policy provides a number of positive tests in terms of tourism. So what I mean by that is it offers support for developments which enhance tourism. There's no test which deals with proposals which may adversely affect tourism per se. And what I would say is the planning system operates in the public interest. It isn't intended to protect any particular private interests. The applicant has carried out a socio-economic impact assessment. They suggest impacts on tourism on existing businesses would not be significant. What I would say is this is an area which is characterised by electrical infrastructure at present. There are substations and overhead lines, and that will continue to be the case. And we have no conclusive evidence that this would have a harmful impact on any existing business in the area. So in terms of what we objectively have in front of us, we don't consider that to be any evidence to suggest that will be a significant impact, bearing in mind that we're here to protect the public interest and not private interests.
Councillor Clark, thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Provost. It's strange how when we all look at maps and things, we're coming round to the same things at times that concern us, or at least we want interest in. For me, having read such a lot, and we all have, I'd like to, Mr. Taylor, if I could just ask you a wee bit more about bonding. Now, bonding's very difficult for anybody to see on maps by its very nature, because it's not there. It's only indicative. So for me, over the years, I've looked at these sorts of things and walked the hills, these hills, but not that particular area. I'm concerned we've got acoustic bonding, we've got visual bondings, and we know what they're meant to do, but we speak about impacts over 10 years, if I'm right. We speak about how long it's going to take these things to grow. So I suppose for me, I'd like to know if you can answer me, please. What would be growing there? Is it fast-growing hawthorn? Is it the dreaded Leylandia that you've got to cut back? You know, I'm not a gardener, I'm not pretending to be, but we would need something very fast-growing. So I suppose that's my first bit, if that's at all possible and not too difficult.
Thanks for your question, Councillor Clark. So there'll be a mix of different things. There would be evergreen species which are intended, I suppose, to provide year-round sort of landscape mitigation. But the submission, and I think there is some information in the papers about that in terms of the applicant's non-technical summary of the environmental impact assessment report, that suggests there will be a lot of native species planted. But I suppose what I would say is there is a planning condition you'll see in the papers which require precise details of the planting arrangements to come forward to us, and officers would expect that to comprise things which are sort of standard or heavy standard trees, so something which is going to have a more immediate impact, as well as things which take more time to mature. So we will be very mindful of trying to secure something which is effective in terms of mitigating landscape and visual impacts when we consider that information. I hope that answers your question.
Does, if I can just come back a wee bit, because we speak about certain gaps and that we expect that. So I'm just thinking in terms of what we speak about decidued trees and things, and I'm very comfortable with what you've just said there, but there will be gaps as well. We must always remember that. Thank you.
Thank you both. Councillor Melville?
Thank you, Provost. Can I ask Mr. Taylor to return to the map of the current and proposed energy developments in and around the area, please? Are you able to do that? Because it's not in the papers is the issue.
I just direct my colleagues to the right slide. I've not got control of that. Is that the slide you were speaking about?
Yes. Can I just confirm that that is the complete picture of all proposed energy developments that the council is aware of, and that there aren't any at various earlier stages that haven't yet been captured by this?
That's accurate to the best of my knowledge. What it doesn't do is it doesn't, you'll see there's a number missing. So there's the Pit Pointy solar farm, which I think is closer to 3 kilometres to the west. Obviously that can't be shown on that slide. There are other developments in this surrounding area that have had permission and have expired, such as a solar farm to the east. There have been proposal of application notices for other developments, but I think after 18 months, if you have not applied, then that sort of effectively rules that out and you'd have to start the process again. So those developments which have either expired or can no longer come forward have been excluded. But to the best of my knowledge, that's accurate.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Brays, I think you're online. You've got a question for the officers.
Yeah,
thank you.
Yes, thanks, Provost, and thank you, Mr. Taylor, for your presentation. I do have a couple of questions that maybe been touched on before, but I'm concerned about the mitigations for visual impact. And we saw your photo montages showing what it would look like in 10 years' time. And yes, there were gaps had to be left in the plantings to accommodate overhead power lines. So my first question is, there's two parts to this. Is this a legislative requirement? In other words, is it the law that no trees must be planted underneath power lines?
Thanks for your question, Councillor Brays. I'd probably ask my colleagues, I'd probably ask the applicant to pick that question up, because the legislation, which isn't planning legislation, is probably beyond the areas I'm qualified to give you an answer on. It's certainly not a planning legislation requirement, but I think they describe various health and safety issues associated with planting underneath, but it might be best directed to SSEN.
Yes, well, thanks for that. It's just that in a project like this, the more we can do to mitigate the visual impact, the better. And, you know, if we can put people away up enormous towers, or even the Montrose steeple to do maintenance up there, I'm not sure why we couldn't plant under those and just keep it under control in those gaps. The other bit of it was during the phase, before we wait till trees are mature, couldn't we better use the bunds for landscaping? Is there a reason why we couldn't cover the bunds in plantings, even if it was just an interim measure?
Thanks again, Councillor Brace. I think the intention is that the bunds will be formed early in the process and planting would take place as early as possible in the process, so that the thing you're describing could be realised as early as possible. In addition to the planting of the bunds on the east side of the site and parts of the west side of the site would also be additional hedgerow planting adjacent to the public road. So it's true to say that it will take time for some of the impacts to be mitigated, but I think a lot of the impacts would be mitigated from many of the viewpoints, perhaps with the exception of the viewpoint to the north and to some extent from the west. The actual bunding does provide a fairly significant degree of impact, but we would be looking for the planting to take place as early as possible in the process.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Gregg?
Thank you, Provost. I'm not sure whether this question's been answered within here. I mean, I don't sit in planning. There's a huge amount of information in here. But one of the things that has come to my mind is that if this development is approved today, you mentioned within the presentation that there will be several lines that will be realigned so as to connect with it. And then depending on what happens with some of the other lines. How will, with the realignment of those lines and the potential of some of the other lines that may then come in, what considerations have been given to the possible sag heights of those realigned lines on some of the neighbouring farms within the area? Because I know that came up when we discussed the contour tealing line, there was some concern around sag heights and modern farm machinery. So with the realignment of these lines and potentially of other lines, and then as time goes by, if there's going to be battery storage and everything else, potentially that may then lead to more lines. What consideration has been given to those sag heights and the impact on neighbouring farms?
Again, that's probably something best answered by SSEN in terms of what the legislative requirements are. I mean, obviously the tower positions, which we're not considering today, the agricultural land would continue to be able to be used, and with the exception of the Teeling to Contour line, what I would suggest is there is a significant net change in terms of 12 towers will be removed along the existing routes and 13 put back in. And actually the net impact of that is, so yes, you might introduce a constraint to an extent on the new areas, but then you would remove that constraint from the other areas. We are talking about short areas, and it's not part of the application that we're considering today. So we just have to be a little careful how much consideration we give to that issue in terms of it's not part of the application that we're considering.
Councillor Beatley, do you want to come back in again?
Yeah, just a quick question. I appreciate that the surrounding area probably doesn't qualify for a habitats regulation assessment, but the Fithy Burn connects to the Dickey, which connects to an SAC down at the Dundee. Why is there no HRA associated with that? Just for clarity.
Thanks for your question, Councillor Beattie. So we've taken advice from Nature Scott on that, and there's been some toing and froing in terms of discussion around that, but they're satisfied that there doesn't need to be an appropriate assessment because they're satisfied that this is a development which should not have a likely significant effect, I think, which is interpreted in case law as capable of having an effect on the special qualities of the SAC. I think the closest one is, I think, protected amongst other things for harbour seals. But yes, as you know, there's a significant distance between the development and the the protected environmental site, and the applicant has installed measures as part of the SUD scheme to ensure that water leaves the site at greenfield runoff rates and is cleaned, obviously, as part of the SUD system. They also propose a number of mitigation measures through the construction process to prevent a situation where contaminants could leave the site.
Thanks, Mr. Taylor.
Thank you very much. Councillor Doran, do you want to come back in again? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So my question relates to the kind of responsibility or possible enforcement, if any, around the kind of supply chain that's noted within the application. So in the summary, it notes that policy 11C and policy 25A relate to local or regional community and economic impact of development proposals. But at the minute, there's no Scottish Government guidance on the implementation of these policies. So there's no test that we can use to make a decision, which makes it quite difficult for us in the context of this application. But the applicant notes that they have a plan relating to local supply chain. Now, this is in their proposals, and I note that there's kind of more an ambitious and less ambitious versions with that have been assessed. But what power, if any, does the council have relating to its planning policy to enforce that? Because you think that other parts of the application, so for example, the planting where there's the mitigation in place, there's the planning enforcement officer, as you noted, would be able to raise that. But what would be the case for this part of the proposal and the economic proposed economic impact and benefits from this?
Thanks for your question, Councillor Doran, and you're quite right. And I think the report acknowledges that that's difficult to secure. I mean, with something like planting, it's a physical land use planning element. It's either there or it's not there. It's either dead or it's alive. We can enforce that. So the applicant has set out a number of steps they would try and take to maximise economic benefits, but the report before you notes that while that is a good intention and it will be obviously more beneficial for the development, it's very difficult in land use planning terms to enforce that. You might intend to employ local people or use local contractors, but if it came about that they weren't available, I don't think that's something we can enforce. So I agree with your conclusion that it's difficult to implement that policy as written in the absence of detailed guidance.
Councillor Durno, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Provost. A bit far away from this mic. My question is on page 103. It's regarding the site itself. Obviously, with climate change, we've had horrendous storms, etc. lately, and rainfall that's been a lot higher than normal. It's actually about mitigating the risk on the site, because obviously there's going to be an awful lot of earth and mud that's going to come out that site. We normally have problems with farms, with mud, etc., especially in October when they're lifting tatties, etc. But I just wanted to know, we're having this monitoring officer getting put in. Is he going to be able to manage that site if we have a really bad storm and there is an awful lot of works going on, or are council workers going to have to get involved to maintain the site? I don't know what's in that field at the moment. I don't know, what crops have been in there at the moment, but that's my concerns. Do we have the facility to manage the situation when the works are taking place? Thank you.
Thanks for your question, Councillor Durno. I mean, as with any development proposal that comes forward, there's obviously risks, and all we can really do is have a situation where mitigation is in place to try and eliminate those risks. In addition to the planning condition monitoring officer, the applicant has proposed an ecological clerk of works to oversee activities within the site which have the potential to have environmental impacts. The mitigation plans and measures design a number of features to try and reduce the risk. You're quite right, it's absolutely impossible to eliminate risk, but that's all we can reasonably do with this proposal and with any proposal, is have measures in place to try and deal and minimise risk as far as is possible.
Okay, thanks.
Are there any further questions? Councillor Cheap.
I was just waiting to see if there was any other questions, Provost. Bit of a planning technical questions, Taylor, really to kind of wrap up from my point of view on questions, but are there any specific timelines with regards to this application being determined? And I say that because if there was a decision today to defer, what would be the implication of that from a timeline point of view?
So the applicant has a right to appeal non-determination in circumstances where we don't make a decision on this proposal by the end of January. I think is probably the best answer I can give you.
Are there any further questions? Councillor John, final one.
Thank you. My final question is just around the roads and the impact on traffic in that area. Has there any consultation taken place? Now, this might be a question for the applicant with the schools locally as well, because I'm not aware if that is a route that we use frequently for school transport.
So I agree, it's probably a question better directed to the applicant. What I would suggest is the transport information which has been submitted has been reviewed by our expert consultees, Transport Scotland, Dundee City Council, our own roads colleagues. There is a planning condition relating to a construction traffic management plan, which I think, if I'm not mistaken, amongst other things, looks to time traffic movements to try and avoid conflicting with things like refuse collection, school travel, and that type of thing. So that's something we can think about if that information was submitted.
Okay, members, I have requests for a 10-minute comfort break. Is that agreed? Thank you.
Please.
Okay, thank you, members and members of the public. That was a much needed comfort break. Councillor Melville?
Thank you, Provost. Just as a point of clarification, members previously have been provided with a more complete map of energy developments at Teeling, which also cross the A90 onto the other side. And so just for the purpose of members' information, it would be useful to confirm what further energy developments are on the eastern side of the A90, just so that we have the complete picture of energy development in the community.
So the information that's been in the slides has been focused on the most significant effects close to the site. You're quite right that there are developments to the east of the A90, further to the north, further to the west, and further to the south. I don't have mapping that goes beyond what I've shown you in the presentation, but I mean, we can look to try and pull something together. I just don't know how quickly I'll be able to do that for the purposes of this discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Members will now go to the list of requests to speak, and the first two speakers are Ms. Angela Taylor and Mr. Ralph Pace on behalf of the Angus Pylands Action Group. If you would like to come forward and just take a microphone, thank you. Now, between the two of you, you have 10 minutes. You don't have to take exactly 5 each, but I will remind you after when you've got 1 minute left. Okay? Thank you very much.
I trust it's working. It is. Right, Provost, councillors, thank you very much for this opportunity to speak. I'd like to address planning policies in accordance with those mentioned in the planning statement for Balcamic substation. The substation, whose boundary area is 225 acres, half the size of Camperdown Park, with a 50-acre substation platform, the equivalent of 28 football pitches. Much reference is given to the fact that the proposal is a national development, which it is, but not a named one within MPF4. As with the teacup overhead line, planning policies within MP4F have been cherry-picked by the applicant rather than addressing the document as a whole, excuse me, which is how the Scottish Government CPO elected that it should be used indeed. Policy 29, Rural Development, has a requirement to support the sustainability, resilience of rural communities and economies whilst protecting agricultural land and forestry and the distinctive character of the countryside. This policy has not been addressed by the applicant. Policy 14, Livable Places, require development to enhance the quality of life and not to be detrimental to the character or amenity of the surrounding area. This policy has also not been mentioned by the applicant. No consideration is given to road user safety or the proximity of a high pressure gas pipeline, as policy 23 relating to health and safety has been omitted from the planning statement. While the application refers to policy 3, biodiversity, the policy explicitly requires land to be protected so that biodiversity is conserved, restored and enhanced, resulting in demonstrably improved state. This has not been satisfactorily demonstrated by the applicant in our view. The application also refers to policy 4, natural places, which states that development proposals, by virtue of their type, location or scale, would have an unacceptable impact on the natural environment will not be supported. However, we believe the applicant has provided insufficient detail or evidence to demonstrate compliance with this policy. Angela will address Policy 11, the energy policy, which can hold weight, but this can only be attributed if impacts are suitably addressed. We are asking today if all policies within MP4F have been addressed as required, if the MPF4 has addressed both climate and the nature crisis, if the economic benefits will be attributed to the area hosting the infrastructure, and finally, if the detrimental impacts of the proposed development have been addressed in the EIA, as a failure to do so negates any weight attributed by Policy 11. Thank you for listening. I'm now going to hand over to Angela.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for letting me speak. So Energy Policy 11 states that impacts must be suitably addressed in order for it to hold weight. And I quote, development proposals will only be supported where they maximise net economic impact, including local and community socio-economic benefits. The biggest socio-economic report gives estimated figures for the local area defined as the whole of Angus and Dundee City, yet fails to detail any specific benefits to the area hosting the substation and neglects to detail any adverse effects. There's no detail of any contracts, materials or employments being sourced locally. In fact, only recently SSEN admitted that labour would need to be brought into the area. The anticipated benefits are for a much wider area rather than the area hosting the infrastructure. Policy 11 advocates that impacts on communities and individual dwellings, including residential amenity, visual impact and noise, must be addressed. Baseline noise monitoring based on farm activities at the time was limited, with estimated construction noise levels. There's a lack of firm commitment to noise measures. And working hours will be an extended 12 hours a day, 7 days a week construction over 3.5 years. There'll be no respite for residents. Policy 11 advocates that significant landscape and visual impacts must be addressed, quoting that where appropriate design mitigation has been applied, impacts will generally be considered to be acceptable. However, this mitigation is not necessarily acceptable. The applicant states that landscape effects would be significant during construction. The provision of plans is not mitigation in itself. More detail is required. The scope of this study area is 3 kilometres from the proposed substation site and not consistent with Hurley Substation's LVAA of 5 kilometres. Craighour Hill was omitted as a representative viewpoint, and yet the view from this will be substantial. Any monitoring should be long-term. Much mitigation revolves around screening. The mitigation lacks detail as to how this screening will be more successful than at Seagreen. The timescale needed to reach maturity, the planting of tiny saplings, the planting of deciduous trees, and insufficient monitoring details all fail to guarantee a substantial response to screen the substation. Policy 11 advocates that impacts on the historic environment are addressed. Again, the study area is only 3 kilometres. It's suggested that there is a medium to high potential for encountering undiscovered buried remains within the site, and as such, Aberdeenshire Archaeological Service have recognised the need to have a written scheme of investigation submitted by the Chartered Institute, approved by the Council, and it should include trial trenching prior to any work on site. Policy 11 must address the effects on hydrology, the water environment and flood risk. The adequacy of buffers is questionable and there's conflicting evidence in the documentation regarding need for a connection to the mains water and sewer. The baseline description repeatedly refers to the Emmett Road in error, which has the potential to be carried through into construction documents, creating confusion and a potential for impact. There are gaps in private water supplies data with reliance on response to questionnaires, whilst errors have been identified by local residents. Policy 11 requires the impacts on traffic and transport to be addressed, and again, this confusion regarding the U322 and the Emmett Road has the potential to confuse both the reviewer and contractors, whilst the estimated 15 to 20,000 HGVs proposed for 2027 alone, this cannot be ignored by the impacts on residents. As local communities experienced in respect with Seagreen, the CTMP was often ignored, so enforcement measures need more detail. Policy 11 must address biodiversity, including impact on birds. Bird surveys were restricted due to access species not recorded. Buffers specific to species should have been identified in order to review the residual impact. With the biosecurity net gain of 10% not identified within the locality, the applicants have said they will need to identify sites further afield, hopefully within Angus. But this failure to even identify the site and no detail of monitoring to see that plans come to fruition fails to provide mitigation at the time of application. The ecological clerk of works should be an independent person. The cumulative impact of other projects attracted by the presence of the substation have not been considered in detail in respect of any of the above mentioned impacts, despite the applicant stating that there will be significant cumulative landscape and visual impacts from the substation combined with other SSCN developments alone. Yet Policy 11 states that all cumulative impacts must be considered. Cumulative impacts will have an impact on noise, landscape and visual impacts, the historical environment, traffic, biodiversity and a potential risk to flooding. When looked at in the context of the rural nature of the area,
Ms.
the
Taylor,
cumulative
you have 1 minute left. Thank you.
cumulative effects result in a gradual eroding of the rural character. So I'll finish with asking, have the detrimental impacts been addressed prior to decision? And if not, Policy 11 cannot hold the weight attributed to it. Thank you. Thank you for letting me speak.
Perfect timing. Thank you very much. Are there any questions? The speakers. Councillor Devine, thank you.
Ms Taylor, you mentioned Emmett Road and the way that it's been misconstrued. I wonder if you could just explain that a wee bit.
It's really difficult because they're taking a road that comes in. One of our other speakers has already taken this up with the chief executive and hasn't had a response, but there is dubiety as to which part of the road you call the Emmett Road. And if the wrong part is taken into the construction details, then there's a bit of a problem because it could have impact on flooding, on all sorts of traffic, etc., etc.
Councillor Dorn, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Just a simple question about engagement during the consultation about the things that you've raised. Were you part of that consultation? Did you raise the things you've raised here with the...
We did, and one of our other speakers is actually going to address consultation as well. We have addressed many of these things and we haven't had adequate answers. We felt much of the consultation process was more of a show and tell, informative event rather than getting the actual details we need. And this is why bringing this in as well, that mitigation really there should be more detail prior to decision rather than relying on a plan afterwards. So just putting in an environmental plan or a transport plan afterwards, those details will come later, and yet you're talking at the consultation without all these things being available. So if you asked about what's going to happen on a particular road, for example, they will say, well, we'll give a transport plan later on in the process. So that actually hasn't been consulted on. If you see what I mean, it's the same with the screening. We'll give details later on. We'll plant trees elsewhere, but there's no sites that have been identified. We'll tell you which plants we're going to have, how long they're going to grow. And as I said, with sea green as well, the deer came along and they nibbled the top of the trees. So you need really this monitoring to carry on for the life scale really of the project rather than 5 years or 10 years. And then what happens? So you identify trees that have been nibbled at the top and you plant new ones. So those ones are then starting from new. So how long is it going to take? And to see those pictures indicative of what it was going to be, I think it was 12 years time, is a really sort of ambitious target, I would say, especially as for 6 months of the year, some of these trees are going to have no leaves on them anyway because they're deciduous trees.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Dugno, thank you.
Thank you, Ms Taylor, for your deputation. I just wanted to ask you, have you actually visited the battery storage unit that's in Arbroath off East Muirlands Road beside the Western Cemetery at all?
I had to admit I haven't. No.
Yeah, because obviously it's a lot smaller than this application, and a lot of the concerns that you have about the environment has been said previously for other battery storage applications. It was just sometimes when you actually see one, they can be a bit different from what you conceive they're going to be like.
Yeah, but as Ralph said, this is huge. The actual area, so the substation platform is 28 football pitches, and the actual area, I could not believe it. I was actually looking it up, and it was half the size of Camperdown Park for the footprint, and that's huge with the potential for as already mentioned, additional developments in the
I
future?
think it's beyond the scale of anybody in this room's experience.
Yeah.
Because none of you would have certainly seen in the UK what is proposed. I do believe you'll be quite shocked. But I think the
Steve McSwiggan, who's the chair of
for getting me along. I had a speech prepared, but I'm going to go a little bit off piste from that because based on some of the stuff that's coming in, there's two questions that I'm really surprised that haven't been asked by the councillors when Ed was putting his determination or his case forward for support. The first question really is, why have SSEN chosen that site at Balchemic Farm? And the second question is, why are they using air insulated source substation, that is insulated substation? And that's important because we know Teeling Community Council have submitted a very detailed objection document in collaboration with the community and indeed a detailed cover letter. But the thing that's really of interest to us is that the discussion around this substation started in 2023, long before our community were made aware of it. This despite us hosting two substations already in the Teeling area. And in 2023, SSEN's land agents approached 4 farmers in our area to see if any were in developments, for a substation. Only one of them to discuss it with them at all, and this is the situation that we're now in. But we're very clear in Teeling. We've really worked very hard over the last 2 years process with SSEN. We've been to a number of their public events, and we've also had meetings with senior executives that are not in the room today, as well, they're underlings, but we have had meetings with them. And on every occasion that we've spoken with them, our concerns have been diminished and diverted from it. The question's a really simple one. They've got a 55-acre platform planned across the road from their current substation. It's really in close proximity to that. They have 110 acres on their site that they own, and we know that because we've checked the land records for that. And the question's an obvious one: why are you not putting it there? When we proposed that to place that question to SSEN representatives, they'd said, well, and asked them, how much land do you need? It was a really telling answer. The answer was, we'll take as much land as we can get in this area, and we are not putting it in that site at the 110 acres because it's technically challenging to do so. I would say that this proposal that they put in front of you is technically challenging. They're digging into the bedrock down a few meters to try and hide something that can't be hidden, and trying to bund around it. They have 110 acres across the road at their own site that they could easily put this in. That could be reduced to 12.5 to 13 acres if they used a gas insulated substation. They've done that in Kintor. They pivoted in 2020 and 2021 from an air insulated consented substation at Kintor to a gas one without really much consultation, but they probably had discussions with them up there, and they really moted the fact that this was really environmentally friendly. They pointed out to us, actually, at the discussions at a local level, that the reason that they couldn't do the gas insulated station is because they're not particularly environmentally friendly. This contradicts really with their position at Kintor, where they lauded the fact that they were using a new technology that was 99% more efficient on greenhouse gases to have the gas insulated substation there. And the question for us, and we've never had an answer for this, but it's asked repeatedly, is why can you not do this in Teeling?
Mr. McSwiggan, 1 minute.
1 minute, that's all I need.
Yeah, that's fine.
The second thing really is our experience of Sea Green. We are well aware of what it's like to work with Seagreen, and to see the with SSEN the lack of compliance with the planning conditions that they say that they would do. You have to be zipped up the back to think that you're going to get the compliance with this application, because they will not do it. We've seen that with traffic management, bunding around it, hiding of the site. I've asked in our application to you to go and have a look at the site that's there and tell us that that's acceptable. If you think that it is, crack on. But if you don't think that it is, I urge you to refuse this application. And that's all I have to say on the matter, because we're tired of talking to them.
Thank you very much. Members, we're going to need, before we go to questions, we need to have a 5-minute recess. We have a technical IT issue. Is that agreed? Thank you.
Can we stay here?